So the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons is a much simpler game than many of its contemporaries, and definitely much simpler than some of its previous editions. And I think that's great. The game developers wanted a game that was more approachable, had simpler rules, so they could attract a wider fan base and make it more palatable for new players. However, a lot of rules, for the sake of simplicity, just don't make a lot of sense, and we're going to talk about those. Luckily, most of these have some pretty easy fixes, and we're going to talk about those too. Number 1, heavy weapons. The rule says that tiny and small creatures have disadvantage when they're wielding heavy weapons, because the weapon is so much bigger than they are. Simultaneously, a barbarian gnome at level 1 can have a strength score of 16 or higher, and yet they have disadvantage with heavy weapons. That's dumb. Heavy denotes a strength requirement, so heavy weapons should have a minimum strength ability score required to wield them and not discriminate against creature size. Number 2, tridents. Tridents have the exact same damage dice and range as spears, despite tridents being more expensive and classified as a martial weapon, while spears are a simple weapon. And that's dumb. To fix this, simply increase the number of damage dice a trident has, maybe to 3d6, because you're poking 3 holes into somebody instead of 1. Or if that's too overpowered for you, you could just do 2d6, much like the greatsword does 2d6 damage, while the short sword does 1d6 damage. That differentiation alone should be enough to justify the trident's greater expense and martial classification. Number 3, critical hits. With the rules as written, it is entirely possible to roll less damage on a critical hit than you could on a regular one. And again, that's dumb. One way I've heard people fix this is they deal max damage on one dice and then roll regularly for the other one. This ensures that you have more damage guaranteed on a critical hit, while still not knowing the exact amount of damage you'll deal for that particular attack. What I do in my games is instead of doubling the number of dice you roll, I say roll regular and double the amount you get. You can still end up rolling less than you would on a regular, but that does tend to have a greater damage output than the rules in the book, which makes more sense to me. Number 4, fall damage. The rules as written say that a character will suffer 1d6 damage for every 10 feet they fall, up to a maximum of 20d6, and the book does not elaborate further at all. This means that a barbarian at level 14 can take a fall of 150 feet and walk away practically unscathed. And you guessed it, that's dumb. The fix I had in mind is by adding permanent injuries or even instant death after certain falling thresholds. For example, at 30 feet you're guaranteed to break a limb, arm, leg, ankle, something. And beyond 200 feet, you suffer instant death when you land. Number 5, sleep, particularly the long rest. Long rests are overpowered. They heal all wounds, regenerate all magic, and even fix most conditions. And they do all that just by virtue of the character getting 8 hours of sleep. And that's dumb. Now what you can do here, you can place specific requirements on when and where the players are able to take a long rest in the first place. After all, sleeping in a tavern is a very different experience than sleeping on a bedroll under the open sky in the wilderness. And maybe that's just it. Maybe your players can only take long rests at the tavern, where they have walls, beds, food and water, a hearth, and for the most part, relative safety. And hey, these are just my ideas to fix some of the rules that I think are dumb. Maybe you can try them in your game and tell me how it goes. Thanks for watching.